Shalom everyone, we're learning melachim Beis, we're up to Perek Beis, and we just read about the fact that Asalya tried to wipe out all of Malchus Breitovitz, but there was a little baby, Yehoash, who was concealed in the Beis HaMikdash, according to one view, even in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and for 6 years he was raised as a baby, and then he was taken out, and Asalya was killed, and Yoash becomes king. So how old was he when he became king? So Perek Yud Beis begins, Ben Sheva Shanim Yehoash b'Malchai. Yehoash was a child king. He became king at the age of 7. He was less than 1 year old when he was concealed in the Beis HaMikdash, and 6 years later he is now 7 years old. And Bishnas Sheva Liyehu Malach Yehoash. Yehoash became king in Yehuda in the 7th year of the reign of Yehu in Malchus Yisrael. V'arboim shana malach b'Yerushalayim. So Yehoash, who became king at the age of 7, had a very long reign. Although he died young, he reigned for 40 years. Of course, that means he died at 47. V'shem imai, right? His father was Achazio. His mother was Sivia mi Beersheba. V'yas Yehoash hayosher b'einei Hashem. So it's fascinating that although Yehoash's father was a Rasha, and his mother was a Rasha, his mother was... No, I'm sorry. Asalya was not Yehoash's mother. We just had Sivia from Beersheba. So Yehoash's mother could have been a tzaddikas, although his father was a Rasha. And Yehoash did what is right in the eyes of Hashem. Kol yamav asher haro Yehoyada HaKohen. Because again, he was under the influence of Yehoyada HaKohen, and Yehoyada HaKohen was madrich him to follow the ways of Hashem. And the Avodah Zarah was eradicated, but the only problem was Rak habamos lo saru. People were still bringing korbanos to Hashem on bamais, private altars, which once you have a Beis HaMikdash is aser, od ha'am mizabchim umekatrim babamos. Okay. So now, actually what we're going to read today is actually the Haftarah for Parshas Shkalim, and you'll see why. Vayomer Yehoash el haKohanim. At some point, it doesn't tell us when, but at some point in his reign, Yehoash said to the Kohanim, Kol kesef hakadoshim asher yuva beis Hashem, kesef over ish, kesef nafshos erko, Kol kesef asher yaleh alev ish, lahavi beis Hashem, yikchu lahem haKohanim ish me'es makaro, v'heim yechazku es bedek habayis, l'chol asher yimatzei sham badek. So let me first say that the problem that Yehoash is facing is that for many, many years the Beis HaMikdash was in neglect, because there was so much Avodah Zarah to the Baal that very few people were even going to the Beis HaMikdash. As a result, the building itself had fallen into disrepair. There were cracks, there were repairs that had to be made. This is called bedek habayis. You fix the cracks in the wall. Now, we know that there is a mitzvah in the Torah that every year, at least the men from 20 and up are supposed to give a half shekel. That goes for the korbanos sibor. That's the machzus shekel. And in addition, if people took different vows, if I say, for example, I want to give my value to the Beis HaMikdash, I want to give my erech. So the Torah at the end of Chumash Vayikra talks about a standard price, depending on your age and your gender. If I say I want to give my erech, my value, I give based on that schedule. Again, there are two different lashonos. If I say damim alai, I want to give my damim, then we have an idiosyncratic measure, whatever I go for on the slave market. If I use the lashon of erchin, that's a davar kotzef. But whatever it is, a lot of money comes into the Beis HaMikdash, both the machzis hashekel, which is called kesef oiver, because the Torah describes machzis hashekel as over al pekudim, that is passed over when you're counted, because they would use the machzis hashekel to count the population, and that's kesef over is machzis hashekel, and kesef nafshais erka is erchen. So these are the main money that comes in, besides korbanos and the like. There's the machzis hashekel, and there's the erchen money. So Yehoyash now directs that all of that money should be used towards bedek habayis, the repair of the temple maintenance. Again, halachically, there are certain issues here, because while it's true that there are opinions that say that erchen and domim money go to bedek habayis, machzis hashekel money is not supposed to go to bedek habayis. Machzis hashekel money is supposed to go to the korbanos of the tzibor, to midim and musafim. So how could Yehoash give a directive that, in fact, the pasuk itself says, kesef hakodashim, the money for the korbanos that is from kesef oiver, from machzis hashekel, should go to bedek habayis. What gives him the authority to do that? The money is supposed to go for korbanos. So different mefarshim have different approaches. The simple point was that this was done through the commandment of a Navi, al pi hayras shah, a one-time deviation. But that is his instruction. He is telling the Kohanim that all the money they get either from the machzis hashekel or from the erchen shall be used for bedek habayis. And that lasted for a number of years. And now, much later, Vayhi b'shnas esrim b'shalei shana l'melech Yehoyash. In the 23rd year of the reign of Yehoyash, so he's now 30 years old, Lo chisku ha'kohanim es bedek habayis. None of the repairs were done. Either the Kohanim used the money for korbanos, or the Kohanim embezzled the money. But the job wasn't done. So Yehoyash sees that the Beis HaMikdash is even in a greater state of disrepair. So Vayikra HaMelech Yehoyash liYoda HaKayin uLeKohanim Vayimer Aleim Madua Einchem Mechazkim Es Bedek Habayis. Why have you not made these repairs? V'yata Al Tikchu Kesef Me'es Makarechem. Do not take money from your friends who are giving you money as donations to the Mikdash. Do not take it for yourself, even for korbanos, that you'll benefit indirectly by eating. Ki lebedek habayis titnua. This must be for the maintenance of the Mikdash. And Pasuk Tes says, Vayeosu haKohanim. The Kohanim agreed to this. Levilti kachas kesef me'es ha'am. That they agreed not to take money from the people if they were not going to use it for bedek habayis. In other words, they would only take the money to be used for bedek habayis. They would not take the money and not use it for bedek habayis. Now, L'maisa, though, Yehoyada HaKayin didn't trust his fellow Kohanim. So instead of people giving money to the Kohanim, who would give it over to the Beis HaMikdash, Yehoyada made an innovation. He made a pushka in which people would directly put the money in the pushka instead of giving it to their buddy the Kohen and telling the Kohen to deliver it. So that's a second change. Vayikach Yehoyada HaKayin Aron Echad. Yehoyada took a box. Vayikav chor b'daltei. He drilled a hole in the opening to the box, the cover of the box. Vayitein oisai eitzel hamizbeach miyamin. He put it to the right of the mizbeach. And bevo ish beis Hashem, when any person came to the courtyard of the temple to bring a korban, v'nosnu shama kaihanim shomrei asaf es kol hakesef amuva beis Hashem. All monies that were given to the kohanim, they had to immediately put it in the pushka. So instead of them being given the money and they deliver it whenever they deliver it, the money was deposited directly into this box. Vayehi, and what would then happen? Kirosam kirav hakesef biyaran. When the box was filled with money, so then they would open the box and use it for repairs. Vayal sofer hamelech v'kohen gadol. So the king's sofer, this means the king's accountant, and the kohen gadol, v'yatsuru v'yimnu, they would wrap the money, they would count the money as hakesef nimsa beis Hashem, v'nosnu es kesef hamasukan al yedei oseh hamlacha. They would then give the money, both the machzis hashekel and the erchen, to workers, craftsmen, who were repairing the mikdash. V'yotziu, the money was spent, l'choreshei ha'etz, to wood carpenters in wood, bonim, builders, ha'isen beis Hashem. Ulagaydrim, people who were building fences or walls, chotzvei ha'even, those who were excavating stone, v'liknais eitzim, and also for the purchase of material. So it was both for labor and for material. To buy wood, avnei machzev, to buy stones, l'chazek es bedek beis Hashem, to strengthen the cracks in the foundations and the walls, ulachol asher yetzei el habayis, and all that was needed for the bayis, l'chazka, to keep it strong. Ach, lo ye'aseh beis Hashem sipais kesef, mizamros, mizrakos, chatzotzros, kol kli zav v'chli kesef, min ha-kesef hamuva beis Hashem. In other words, this is actually making a point that although normally we want the utensils of the mikdash to be gold and silver, but this money was bedafka not used for what you might call luxury items. This was used for the binyan. That this money was not used to have gold and silver, musical instruments, or basins, or trumpets. Ki li'osei hamulacha yitnua, this was given to workers for the maintenance of the building. V'chisku bo es beis Hashem. And then it mentions, v'lo yechashvu eso anashim asher yitnu es hakesef al yadam laseis li'osei hamulacha ki v'yamunah heim osim. So this is an interesting halacha, that when the supervisors were given the money and were told to arrange to pay contractors and builders and carpenters and material suppliers, the supervisors did not have to give a detailed accounting of where the money went, because they were trusted as being honest. So if, for example, I'll use a dollar amount, even though obviously they were not dollars. If $1,000 was taken out of the pushka and was given to the Armarkal was the supervising Kohen, and the Armarkal makes a contract with a stonecutter or a carpenter or a builder, whatever it would be, or a kablan, the Armarkal did not have to report how much the job cost and how much is left over. The Armarkal was trusted that they would not embezzle money or engage in transactions that were dishonest. So, basically, therefore, what Yehoash was misakein al pi nevuah, presumably, was that the machzis hashekel money and the erchen money could be used only for temple maintenance and for no other purpose. Bedek habayis. But Pasuk Yud Zayin tells me that another type of money could not be used for that. Kesef asham v'kesef chataos. Let's say a yachid committed certain sins inadvertently. And these inadvertent sins require korbanos. Some korbanos are called the korban chata, sin offerings. Some are korban asham, guilt offerings. Different types of averos. The Zerika Saddam is different. The animal is different. Male versus female goat. The Zman of Achila is different. We don't have time to go over all of the halachas. And a person has two ways of bringing this korban. He could bring the korban by bringing an animal, but then he'd have to choose the animal. Or there were pushkas. He could put in the money. Chatas. He puts in an envelope. This is the chatas for Avraham. This is the chatas for Yitzchak. And then the Beis HaMikdash will buy the animal and handle all the details. If you're not an expert in the laws of korbanos, that might be easier. So that also went into the pushka. But it was designated as chatas money or asham money. So what the pasuk is saying is, the money that Yechidim designated for sin offerings or for guilt offerings, that could not be diverted to the building funds. That had to be used for a chatas and for an asham. Now, the pasuk doesn't quite say that, because it actually says, Lo Yuva Beis Hashem is not used for the maintenance of the temple. La Kaihanim Yiyu, it goes to the Kaihanim. Now that's very fair. It doesn't go to the Kaihanim. It goes to a Chatas, and it goes to an Asham. What do you mean it goes to the Kaihanim? So there are two ways of learning it. One way of learning it is that Einachinami, that's what it means. Because since the meat of a Chatas and the meat of an Asham is eaten by Kaihanim, even though the internal organs and the fats are burnt on the altar, so one way of saying that you bring it as a korban chatas and asham is something that is of benefit to the Kehanim. But Rashi brings another drasha from Maseches Tamura that this refers to the halacha of Mosar. Mosar means extra money. Let's assume I put in money in an envelope and I say, this is for the korban chatas of Yitzchak ben Avram. So the Beis HaMikdash will buy the animal and sanctify it for Yitzchak ben Avram and bring a chatas. But let's assume there's extra money left over. Yitzchak ben Avram put in $100, and the Beis HaMikdash gets the animal for only $90. What do you do with the $10 of change? That is what the Gemara calls a mosar chatas. So the halacha is, a mosar chatas is used to buy burnt offerings that are burnt on the Mizbeach. This is called Kayetz HaMizbeach, and this is an unusual thing, that it's not an obligatory korban, but when there's dead time and there are no other korbanos being brought, so we bring olos. Now an ola is totally burnt on the altar, but the hide of the ola, the hide, goes to Kohanim. And therefore that's what it means, Kesef Asham, the Kesef Chatas, meaning the Maisar of Kesef Asham and Kesef Chatas goes to be Kayetz. Kayetz means a dessert for the Mizbeach, and that is for the benefit of the Kohanim. Either way, though, the overall pshat here is the same, and that is, the only monies that are diverted to the building funds are the Machzis HaShekel and the Erchen, and of course, I should also add, any money that was specifically given Lebedek HaBayis, that's Pashat. But the money that was designated for Asham and Chatas, that must be used for Asham and Chatas, and if there's a Maisar, it can be used for Kayetz HaMizbeach. Right, so this is the Haftarah Taka for Parshas Shkalim, giving the Machzis HaShekel, which we're going to read Rosh Chodesh Adar. And this is Yehoash's building fund campaign to repair and beautify the Beis HaMikdash. But in the meantime, our old friend, our old enemy really, Hazael from Syria, is still making trouble. And now we're going to read about that. Az Yalech Hazael Melech Aram. Hazael, remember Elisha anointed him, and Elisha was crying because he said how many Yidden Hazael is going to kill. And Hazael, the king of Aram, came, Vayilachem al Gas. So first he tried to conquer the city of Gas, and he did, which is part of the northern kingdom. But then, Vayasem Hazael Panav Laulois al Yerushalayim. Chazael from Syria, from Aram, turns his face to the south to fight against Malchus Yehuda in Yerushalayim. So what did Yehoash do? Vayikach Yehoash melech Yehuda is kol HaKodashim asher kisha Yoshafat v'Yehiram v'Chazio avaisav Malchi Yehuda v'yes Kadashav v'yes kol HaZahav v'nimtza b'yotzos Beis Hashem u'Beis HaMelech v'yishlach l'Chazael melech Aram v'yal meyal Yerushalayim. So we're going to see later that this was actually a big Aveira, but what was interesting is, in spite of Yehoash using all of the monies of Erchin and Machzus HaShekel for the maintenance of the Beis HaMikdash, and whether he completed his project or not, we are told that when he was threatened with Chazael, he bribed him by taking all of the treasures that his father Yehoshaphat, his grandfather rather, Yehoshaphat is Yehoshaphat, Yehiram, Achaziah, Avaisav. So it's father, grandfather, great-grandfather. All that they had dedicated to the Mikdash. And all that he had dedicated to the Mikdash, as well as Eitzras HaMelech. So it's both his private treasure and the treasures that were dedicated to the Beis HaMikdash. And he gave them to Chazael as a tribute, and in that way he bribed. So apparently this was not a war for territory, this was a war for tribute. He paid off. It's really kind of mafia. Give me your treasures and I'll leave you alone. We're going to see that although there's not a lot of detail here, but this in fact was considered to be an Aveira. V'yaser divrei Yayash, and the rest of Yayash's accomplishments, V'chayel asher asa, and everything else he did. Halo heim kesuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayam Malchi Yehuda. This is in the Sefer Divrei Hayam Malchi Yehuda, the secular book. And tragically, Yayash was murdered. V'yakumu avoda v'yikrishu kesher v'yaku es Yayash Beis milai hayaret sila. That his own servants rebelled against him, and he was assassinated in this house of Mila, Hayaret Sila, on the way that goes down to a town called Sila. So this is a house on a road that is going down to a certain town, and we are told who did kill him. V'yizachor ben Shimas, v'yizeved ben Shaimer, Avadav, these two so-called servants, Hikua, they killed him, Vames, and he died, Vayamais, and he died, Vayikbaru oso im avaisa ber David, he was buried in Ir David, that's adjacent to Yerushalayim, and that is where the melachim were buried. Vayimleich Amatzia b'nai Tachtav, Amatzia, the son of Yayash, became the king. Again, it's a little difficult to understand this here. Normally, when you have a revolt, we are rebelling against the king because we want to replace the dynasty. Here, you have the Avadim of Yayash murder Yayash, and the only thing that happens is Yayash's son becomes king. So if the dynasty is going to be continued, why were they revolting in the first place? So it could be that they actually were revolting because of the fact that they thought Yayash was very weak, because he gave away all of this tribute to Chazael. Or it could be that maybe they did attempt to make their own dynasty, but they were not successful, and therefore essentially Yayash's supporters were miskaber, and they got Amatzia to become king, to continue the Malchus Beis David.